headline in the papers: people trust ghosts more than government. Just how bad are the polls for those in political office right now? It turns out that more people are putting their faith in the dead than in living politicians. A new survey finds that there are more people who believe in ghosts than trust their government, unless we think that failing faith in government is just an American thing. This poll was taken in Britain. The poll of nearly 1,000 people in the United Kingdom found that 50% believe in the existence of ghosts, but just 20% say that they have faith in their government.
I don't like it.
It also turns out that more than twice as many people believe in ghosts as there are people who trust their media. So, it's not all evenly distributed, because when it comes to religion, you might not be surprised to find out that Catholics are the most likely to believe in ghosts, 64% of the people that were surveyed, whereas atheists are the least, though still 37% of the atheists believe in ghosts. And although the atheists are the least likely to believe in ghosts, they are also the most likely to not be scared of the ghosts that they believe in. So, more or less, you can look around in Britain and, from this survey anyway, guess that most people have a pretty positive perspective on supernatural visitors like ghosts. So, it's not just government, right? Because that story, that could be in a lot of different places. We could hear it all over the place. Because faith is flagging in a lot of those institutions that have defined who we are and what we believe in and how we find truth in the world. And a lot of that falling trust has to do with some of the ways that these institutions and their leaders, well, they aren't quite living up to our expectations. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should put the ghosts in charge for a change. But questions of who defines us and by what principles we intend to live, well, let's just say those are hot questions right now. And there's influencers out there, all kinds of people in government and business and in media who are calling upon us all the time. Be part of my tribe. Place your identity in me. Put your faith in my group or product or way of seeing the world, and then you will have all the answers. So how do we know? How do we know who are the good ones and who we really should identify with? Whether or not we should trust what we're hearing and where ultimately we should invest our hearts and our souls. I don't think this is a new question for people, because I think it's the same kinds of questions that the people in our readings today are struggling with as well. Our gospel opens up with some Pharisees and Herodians plotting together to entrap Jesus. Now, by those two labels, we know that these are both people that are identified with particular groups, with strongly held ideas about what's going wrong in the society around them, and, of course, how to fix it. In other words, Pharisees and Herodians are two different partisan groups from Jesus' day. Now, we, of course, know how partisan groups tend to work. We're familiar with them. They're not all that different, and they happen all over the place. But what's really interesting about the Pharisees and the Herodians in this particular story is that they figured out a way to find common cause, and they wouldn't normally. They actually coming from some very different places and with different ideas about what their society should be doing and what the answers are. They've decided to make an exception to their differences of opinion, because they look outside their front door from their positions of probably pretty elite insiders within the cultural and political establishments of where they are, and they see Jesus gaining over crowds, the very same crowds that they hoped that they could sway to their own viewpoints. And the problem is that Jesus's ideas and things that he's preaching, well, they don't exactly fit their approach. So they're willing to work together. They want to trick Jesus into saying something that will get him arrested or turn those crowds of people against them. Now, Herodians, don't know a lot about them, but we're pretty sure that they were Hellenized Jewish elites who believed that the best path forward for peace and prosperity of their kingdom was to keep the dynasty of Herod, the monarchs of Herod and his sons, on the throne. It's not really clear if they wanted political independence for Israel or if they accepted being part of the wider Roman Empire and some of the assimilation that went with that. But either way, they did not want a messianic figure stirring up notions of continuity with the ancient line of King David. The Pharisees, on the other hand, were members of a Jewish religious group, and they preached that perfect observance of the law and its purity codes was the only way to restore the kingdom and its relationship with God. They're coming from very different places. But if you look at both of these groups, you can see how a rogue preacher like Jesus might kind of threaten some of what they're thinking of, because Jesus tended to proclaim that it was the quality of your heart and the love and mercy of your actions, rather than a particular dynasty or a particular set of rituals, that would signal the restoration of God's kingdom. And just the day before, they probably heard all of the ruckus when Jesus rode into town on a donkey and the crowds proclaimed him king and Messiah. So from their perspective, these Jerusalem insiders want to make sure that this small town faith healer does not go any further with taking the capital by storm. So the Pharisees and the Herodians join forces and they hatch this plan. They think it's the perfect trick question. Because you know what? Times have not changed. Taxes were a hot button issue then, just like they are now. I mean, what are you going to say? Either, I don't like paying taxes, but I'm not going to do it. That's going to get you arrested eventually, right? Or you could say, I love taxes. In which case, nobody's going to be happy with you that way. It's kind of a bind. There is no right answer here for Jesus. But Jesus' opponents come at him. They try to disguise their attack with flattery. And as soon as they lay their trap and ask their question, Jesus sees straight through, turns around, and he confronts them. It seems there's no artifice when approaching the Son of God, because we, guess what, are seen for who we are and what we bring before God. Every time, our true selves, our true intent. But Jesus doesn't send them away either. Because at its heart, I don't think this is a story about taxes or about which of these two long gone partisan movements was right. I think this is a story about coming face to face with Jesus and showing Jesus everything, even sometimes your worst and pettiest of plots, and yet still being accepted by Jesus and challenged to stay and to hear more about God and what God is calling us to be. Because instead of getting angry with them, Jesus decides to ask them a question of his own. Pulls out the coin. Whose head? Whose head is on here, and whose title is this? So Jesus then gives them this famous line. He says, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's." Because, of course, whose head is on the coin? Caesar's, right? The thing is, his listeners, his audience, especially that crowd, they know exactly what Jesus is getting at. Because it's a clever way of pointing out who this is really all about. It is not about dividing up church and state obligations. Because everyone there, they know who has minted them, who has made us. All of humanity, all of us made in God's image. So there's this irony, great irony in what Jesus' reply. Ultimately, guess what? We are all God's, and we owe everything to God. So, what does this have to do with partisanship and belonging? Well, I think it has everything to do with it. Because if, in fact, as Jesus said, we are meant to give to God what is God's, then we have to start to ask ourselves, how do we do this when all of humanity and everything that we are and pretty much everything that we have, everything that sustains us, everything, all of it comes from God. Literally all of us and all of everything bears God's image. That's what's imprinted on all of us. So for starters, we can just forget about any ideology that puts us into rival tribes and factions that might try to tell us that anything less than love and mercy for all is somehow the answer to our problems. Only, you know what, humans, we lose sight of that a lot. So then we have to ask ourselves, how do we make sure that we aren't putting our faith in people and places that do just that pull us away from God and from each other? How do we know the good ones and who to identify with and who to trust? How do we figure out where we should truly invest our hearts and our souls? Well, I can tell you that the good news here is that we do not have to resign ourselves to being disappointed all the time. And you know what? We don't have to look to ghosts to find an answer. I mean, look at Moses. Moses wants to be the kind of leader that has all the answers. He wants to be able to go back to his people and say, I've seen God face to face, and God is right here, and we will get across this wilderness because God has given me the answers. But God looks at Moses and says, you know what? I think that might be dangerous. To lead the people, Moses, you just need to keep looking at where I've been. Catch glimpses of my goodness, the ones that are all around me, all around you. See where God's been. And then, you know what? Follow in God's footsteps. And that'll be good enough. You'll get the people there. I know you will. We could look at the church in Thessalonica and all of those people who are struggling. They're very early Christians, and they remain misunderstood. They're a mistreated minority in this very urban Roman city in Asia Minor. And Paul says, guess what? Look at all the work of your faith. Look at the labor of your love. Look at the steadfastness of your hope in Lord Jesus Christ. That's God with you and at work in you and through you. So just keep at it. Keep seeking justice, love, mercy, and walking humbly with God. And there will be no question about who you are and whose you are. You won't have to define yourselves in opposition to anyone else, because all the people will know, just like the words of the old song, that you are Christians by your love. By your love. Good one. I love that one too. 70s kids here.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, it all comes down to who defines us and the ways that we let this shape how we live our lives. Because that coin that Jesus held, it probably said something like Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. Now, I've suggested this before, but I think it's a great spiritual practice to return to over and over again, to ask ourselves, what does my imprint say? It starts with our name, our own personal name. Then it continues to proclaim each and every one of us, beloved child of God and bearer of the divine image. That's our inscription. That's what we carry from the day of our birth. It's God's imprint and claim on us, every member of humanity. The whole of creation is right there, written into the very fabric of the universe. So the next time that you're feeling discouraged by all of the nonsense going on out there, or you find yourself getting wrapped up in all of that kind of nonsense, I invite you to do a reset. Take a moment to yourself and read off your inscription to yourself. Say your name and remember that you are the beloved child of God and bearer of the divine image. And then think of all the people around you, probably even some of the ones that you're having the hardest time with, and say their name. And remind yourself that they are the beloved child of God and the bearers of the divine image. And then, keep doing that as long as you need to. And you'll know when you're ready. Because you'll start feeling like you can redirect yourself into living more and more like you know that in your heart. And you can step out, seek justice, love mercy, and offer everything that you are and everything you do up to the God who is the one in whom we are made, who owns us, and to whom we offer